Thank you very much for attending this press conference. I'm very pleased to return to Nigeria to present the final report of the European Union Election Observation Mission on the 2023 Nigerian elections. On behalf of our mission, I'd like to express my appreciation to the Independent National Electoral Commission for inviting the European Union to observe the 2023 general elections, and I'd like to also express my gratitude to federal and state institutions, judiciary, civil society, media and political parties for their cooperation throughout the course of our observation. The EU EOM final report contains a detailed analysis of all stages of the federal and state level elections, from the candidate registration process to collation and announcement of results. Based on this analysis, the report concludes with 23 recommendations aimed at improving future electoral processes. Among these 23 recommendations, we categorize 6 as priority recommendations. Ladies and gentlemen, before I turn to the content of our report and the recommendations we offer, I would like to quickly recap how an EU election observation mission assesses an electoral process, as well as the composition and duration of our mission. Following an invitation from INEC, the EU EOM deployed from the 11th of January to the 11th of April. Our mission comprised a core team of 11 analysts based in Abuja and 40 long-term observers deployed across all 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. For the 25th of February election day, a total of 110 observers from 25 EU member states, as well as Canada, Norway and Switzerland, participated along with a 7-member delegation from the European Parliament. For the 18th of March elections, the mission deployed 63 observers. During the course of the elections, the mission issued 2 preliminary statements on the 27th of February and on the 20th of March, respectively. Both statements are available on our website. Our preliminary statements and this final report are based on the analysis of compliance with Nigeria's regional and international commitments for democratic elections. This was the 7th EU election observation mission in the country since 1999, attesting to the EU's strong commitment to Nigeria's democracy. So let me now turn to some of the key findings in our assessment of the elections, as detailed in our final report, and in particular around the aforementioned 6 priority recommendations. In the lead up to the 2023 general elections, Nigerian citizens demonstrated a clear commitment to the democratic process. That said, the election exposed enduring systemic weaknesses and therefore signal a need for further legal and operational reforms to enhance transparency, inclusiveness, and accountability. Positively, Nigeria has signed up to key regional and international commitments for democratic elections. While we consider the electoral legal framework provides an adequate foundation for the conduct of democratic elections, there are ambiguities in the law. For example, the Electoral Act 2022, which had its first test in a general election in 2023, and other legal instruments evidenced gaps in terms of transparency, accountability, and inclusivity, and left room for uncertain implementation. For that reason, we recommend, and this is our first priority recommendation, to protect the interests of voters through certainty of law for all stages and aspects of electoral processes by eliminating from electoral law and regulations errors and ambiguities to avoid potential for confusing interpretations and ensuring the revision processes are inclusive. A positive aspect of the voter registration process was active youth engagement, with 2/3 of the 9.5 million new registrants being young people. However, there is a need for greater efforts to protect genuine youth participation in elections. And similarly, ongoing underrepresentation of marginalized groups in political life requires robust remedial action. Overall, the collection of permanent voter cards was adversely affected by poor institutional planning and a lack of transparency. To ensure the accuracy and inclusiveness of the voter register, an external independent audit would be beneficial. The campaign was competitive, with freedom of assembly largely respected, as evidenced by the nationwide conduct of rallies. However, challenges such as the naira, cash, and fuel scarcity and incidents of orchestrated violence were observed to hamper some campaign activities and to reduce attendance. In addition, the mission recorded cases of undue interference by governors, while the campaign was also marred by internal party conflicts. Personality-focused canvassing and misuses of incumbency by governors tilted the playing field, leading to increased polarization, driven by divisive rhetoric based on ethnicity and religion. Candidates' prospects to meaningfully campaign also were negatively impacted by a high level of disputes resulting from candidate registration. The mission noted well over 1,000 pre-election court cases, some negatively impacted or overlapped with the polls. Our mission recorded more than 100 campaign-related violent incidents, including, tragically, assassinations. These and other criminal acts obstructed the campaign, disrupted the elections, and suppressed voter participation. Weaknesses in the legal framework for these electoral offences and others, such as misuse of state resources, intimidation, and vote buying, contributed to inadequate enforcement. Key state institutions, including INEC, but also political parties, failed to tackle these problems. Coming to our second priority recommendation, we consider there is a pressing need to address impunity for electoral offences through robust, well-defined and effective interagency coordination governed by clear rules on non-partisanship, optimization of resources, delivery of effective investigation and sanctioning, and provision of regular public consolidated information on outcomes. INEC introduced some very positive measures early in the electoral process. For example, it increased the number of polling units and established a system of electronic accreditation of party agents, media, and observers. Public confidence, however, in INEC was severely damaged on the 25th of February due to its operational failures and lack of transparency. While some corrective measures introduced before the 18th of March elections seemed to have a positive impact, overall trust was not restored and eventually led civil society to call for an independent audit of the entire process. However, there is no legal requirement for qualification and merit-based appointments of the positions of INEC Commissioner or Resident Electoral Commissioner. Prior to the elections, selection processes were questioned, leaving the institution vulnerable to mistrust. We believe that these vulnerabilities can be effectively addressed by, and this is our third priority recommendation, establishing a robust operational framework for the independence, integrity, and efficiency of electoral administration through an inclusive and publicly accountable mechanism for selecting candidates to the posts of INEC commissioners and recs based on clear criteria of evaluation of merits, qualifications, and verified non-partisanship. A number of key issues hindered freedom of expression and limited voters' access to diverse information. For example, analytical reporting was limited due to self-censorship by state-level outlets who feared retribution from governors. Fines were imposed by the broadcast media regulator without due process. We are also seriously concerned journalists faced attacks and with little consequences for the perpetrators. Therefore, and our fourth priority recommendation, we consider it essential to afford adequate protection to freedom of expression by developing a comprehensive operational framework underpinned by the skills and means for ensuring prompt investigation and prosecution of all types of attacks against media practitioners. Positively, the media raised voters' awareness, fact-checkers stood up against disinformation, and media outlets extensively covered the campaign, providing equitable exposure to both the APC and PDP. Disappointingly, politicians avoided answering merit-based questions during interviews and instead engaged in party infighting. While social media was an important tool for information exchange, campaigning and mobilization, misinformation was massively spread. Additionally, we noted legal provisions such as the Cybercrime Act had the effect of encouraging self-censorship, and we therefore consider amendment of the legislation is needed to safeguard freedom of expression. Detailed operational frameworks to strengthen inclusion are needed. For example, we found that persons with disabilities could not always access polling units and assistive devices were rarely available. Data on registration and voting by internally displaced persons was not published. Women's political participation in Nigeria is not in line with the country's international commitments and provision of equality. The number of women participating in the process evidences a worrisome trend of decline since 2007. Only one woman contested among 18 presidential candidates, and there were no nominated female running mates. Only 2 women contested among governorship candidates. The government and major political parties again failed to tackle exclusion and discrimination against women, despite the national gender policy target of 35% of women in appointed and elected positions. Women candidates at all levels of elections barely reached 10%. And coming to our 5th priority recommendation, this long-standing discrimination demands urgent and robust affirmative action to ensure meaningful women's representation through special measures in line with the Beijing Principles and Nigeria's national gender policy to increase the representation of women as candidates and in elected office. Further supported by cross-sectoral, intensified and substantiated capacity building and sensitization to eliminate discrimination. So while the 25th February elections were held on schedule, a lack of transparency and operational failures reduced trust in the process and challenged the right to vote. Voters assigned to new polling units had difficulties in identifying their correct polling unit, and the conditions in almost half of polling units observed did not ensure the secrecy of the vote. In 16 states, the mission noted incidents of violent attacks on polling units and indeed on INEC staff and harassment of voters. The counting procedures were negatively impacted by overall poor understanding, particularly in completing forms, and chaotic and overcrowded conditions in collation centres observed. Key issues impacting the orderly conduct of elections on March the 18th included interference by party agents and a lack of adequate protection of the secrecy of the vote. The elections were impacted by outbreaks of fighting and thuggery, which led to a high number of cancellations of polling units and, regrettably, also fatalities. The introduction of the Bimodal Voter Accreditation System, or BVAS, and the INEC Results Viewing Portal, IREV, was widely seen as an important step to ensure the integrity and credibility of the elections, but lack of transparency before the polls, and notably the severely delayed display of presidential result forms on the 25th of February, for which INEC failed to give a timely and comprehensive explanation, dashed the public trust in election technologies and in INEC. For both elections, INEC did not publish key relevant information, hampering transparency throughout the collation processes and the declaration of election results. For example, INEC failed to publish the manner of calculation of the declared winners, turnouts, number of accredited voters, and the list of polling units where elections were cancelled, postponed, or not held. The absence of this information undermined the possibility for independent verification of the outcome and public trust. We consider it vital, and this is our final priority recommendation, to protect the free expression of the will of the voter and integrity of elections by establishing a robust, transparent and easily verifiable results processing system with clear rules. These include uploading polling unit results from the polling unit only and in real time. At each level of collation, results forms to be uploaded in real time and all forms to be published in an easily trackable and scrapable database format. All 23 recommendations, including the 6 priorities I've just outlined, are primarily addressed to key stakeholders including INEC, the National Assembly, the government, political parties and civil society involved in electoral reforms. We have already presented the final report to INEC, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Presidency. Later this week, the mission will hold a roundtable meeting with election stakeholders to further discuss and reflect on our recommendations and their possible implementation. We offer these recommendations in the spirit of cooperation, but of course it's up to Nigerian institutions and partners to decide whether they will take them forward and take them into consideration. Importantly, there is a need for political will to achieve improved democratic practices in Nigeria. Inclusive dialogue between all stakeholders on electoral reform remains crucial. The European Union stands ready to support Nigerian stakeholders in the implementation of these recommendations. I thank you very much for your interest.